This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. We are taping on July 8th, and my guest today is Milena Miller.
Hi.
Hi, Milena.
Thank
so
you,
glad
Lois.
you could be with us.
Thank you.
And we're going to be mostly talking about recent events involving the Bill of Rights Committee and the charter government movement here in Athens County. But first I want to talk about some July birthdays and so on. And the first one I want to mention, since we are taping on the 8th of July, is Kathy Kollwitz, who was a German artist, quite a famous artist of the early part of the 20th century, actually. And she was had a rather sad life. She was born in the 19th century and died at the end of the Second World War. But during her lifetime, she wrote a great deal about, or less writing and more art about the sadness of war and the terrible things that it meant to mothers to send their sons away to war. She lost one of her sons in the First World War.
Oh, I see.
And a grandson in the Second World War, actually. So she's best known for her pictures of mothers and children. So Kathy Kollwitz for July 8th.
Be interesting to know today what, if she were alive, what she thought of our involvement in so many
Right.
Unproclaimed wars, if you will, that we seem to be involved in around the planet.
Well, of course, she was a person in Germany during the time when Germany was really promoting its empire, or its want
Right.
for empire. They came kind of late to the game because they didn't even get together until 1870. So, which was during her when she was a young girl, as a matter of fact. So then, of course, you had the Kaiser in the First World War, and even worse, Hitler in the Second World War. But she
Made the Kaiser look somewhat like a saint, I'm afraid.
Yeah, probably. But she managed to, of course, her works were banned after Hitler came to power.
Right.
But apparently she lived, she never went to a concentration camp or something like that. So that was the good news about that time. Now, another person with a July birthday for the 10th is Mary McLeod Bethune, and there's a picture here of her. She founded a college for black women
Right.
In Florida, I believe. And she was quite an important spokesperson for blacks and black rights all during her long life. And she was especially active during the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt. So, of course, she's someone who's in the past, a woman in the past. Well, my goodness, let's see. Here are some other interesting people. I mentioned Kirsten Flagstad, who was born on July 12th, because she's someone that I actually heard. She was a famous singer.
Okay.
And Norwegian, actually, and she put Wagner back on the opera stage, really, in 1935 when she joined the Metropolitan Opera. And sort of interesting that the author here mentions that she had a sort of a small voice, and people, my goodness, she certainly didn't have a small voice when I heard her.
And where did you hear her?
Well, I heard her in San Francisco Opera that would have been in the late 40s. She was already quite an elderly lady by then.
Okay.
Because she was 40 when she joined them in 1935.
I see.
So she was over
Late,
50.
late for The Voice.
You late for The Voice,
Yeah.
although for a dramatic soprano
Yeah.
like she was, it was probably really necessary to get older to become
Right.
a stronger singer and so on. But then I saw her twice. I saw her in her final performance in New York in must have been 1950 or so.
Okay.
So
Oh, how wonderful for you to have had that
Yes.
connection. That's terrific. You know, I mean, you honor these women every month, but, you know,
Yes.
to have actually seen them or,
seen them or heard them, right?
is really
Well,
pretty
I've mentioned
spectacular.
before that I heard Marian Anderson,
Right.
and that was in San Francisco. So, and getting away from the women for a minute, I also heard Paul Robeson
Oh, you did.
in San Francisco, and that was at a time when he was so, you know, politically incorrect.
Blackballed.
That
Pretty much.
his concert was given in a boxing emporium, a boxing ring sort
Really?
of place in San Francisco. But of course, that beautiful voice, that wonderful deep bass voice that he had. Well, let's see. We have Emmeline Pankhurst for July 14th, and she was a famous English proponent of women's rights. She and her daughters were both very active in the women's rights movement, which got women in Britain the right to vote before we got it in the U.S., actually, Emmeline Pankhurst. And here's another American woman who started out life as an Italian, Frances Cabrini. There's a pretty picture of her. She is the first American saint. She was a
Okay.
Roman Catholic nun, sister, and she wanted to be a missionary, and the Pope at the time suggested she come to America. And so she did in like about 1879 or something like that, and she lived in the United States long enough to become an American citizen and so forth. So,
An interesting time for her, you know,
Yes.
roughly 10 years after the end of the Civil War. I mean,
right.
very,
yeah.
very interesting time of, you know, growth for our nation and healing and so forth. So I would imagine
Right.
she was, you know, faced some of that.
Yes, well, I think she was in the state of Maryland, which was founded as a Catholic colony long ago, you know, and I think she lived there most of her time in America. But shortly after her death in the 1920s, she was started on the path to sainthood and was beatified in like just after the Second World War, I believe. Of course, it was a number of years after her death. And we're looking forward to seeing the Pope visit.
When is that happening?
I think it's not until August or September.
Uh-huh.
You know, right now he's in Latin America.
I know. I've
Yeah,
been following it a little bit. So
he's been making the rounds.
he seems to be an amazing person and has
Yeah.
brought to the Pope,
Right.
Popehood, a lot of his, you know, unique gifts.
Yes.
So,
Well, originally from Latin America, from Argentina.
Right.
Yeah. Well, now we ought to get on to this current news that we have.
current news, where we have lots of women, local women involved, I might
Yes, we
say.
do.
Most recently, we've submitted almost 2,200 signatures a couple of weeks ago to the Board of Elections concerning our attempts to change the form of government in some respects. in Athens County to a charter government. We are not alone in this movement, I might add. It's a home rule movement, which is also simultaneously being proposed by 3 other counties, those being Meigs, Medina, and Fulton County in Ohio. And most recently, the city of Columbus, of course, is also proposing similar legislation. So these petitions, of course, were simply to gather enough signatures to validate our efforts and get that initiative on the fall ballot.
Well, it's very interesting that the signatures were accepted by the Board of Elections.
Well, they were, because there wasn't anything invalid about them. I mean,
No.
you're sure to lose a few due to duplication or this or that, but out of the nearly 2,200, I'm not really sure what the final number was, but it well exceeded what we needed to get
Right, which
to
was
get the
about
issue on the ballot.
1,500 or
Right.
something like that.
So we worked very, very hard and diligently, and we had our meeting last night, and I think it's really interesting to, while there are so many of us involved, there were 33 or 35 people across Athens County. This is not, some of us live in the city, but this was not a city issue by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
This effort has really expanded into the county, frankly, because we simply feel powerless to do anything else. We've tried dealing with the regulators, the state government, the oil and gas industry. We've tried to
right.
deal so much with so many of these entities. And AFCAN, which has been working diligently on some I won't say anti-fracking, but some but fracking issues, injection wells have been the main concern here in Athens County and in southeastern Ohio. Because if you look at the injection wells and the volume of them that have been located across the state,
Right.
the majority are in Appalachian counties. So AFCAN has been fighting a valiant fight against, actually just trying to have some communication and a public forum. And they've been virtually stopped at every neck of the road. And so we felt so powerless given that, that we needed another opportunity. So going after a charter form of government we thought might bring us the ability to exercise some of the rights that are given to us by the Ohio Constitution. So.
Right. Well, you spoke about the amount of injection well waste that's
Yes.
coming into the county. And there's no question, here it is, 2015. We're number 1 in the state in
Right.
terms of the amount of injection waste being put into injection wells in Athens County,
Exactly.
Ohio. And these were figures that I think Andrea Reich from the committee had given out about the
And I think
great
those are,
growth
I actually
over
think
the
those are
years.
quite dated. Andrea
Well,
did a
this
lot
is
of work. This is
right
from
in-
AFCAN, yeah. So this is March.
March of 2015.
Right.
It already mentions the new well, which is going in.
Right.
I don't believe it's accepting any waste yet, but surely will be doing soon because they began drilling this spring, I know, for that.
And as of this chart in March, we were second only to Coshocton for receiving this bulk of this waste material. However, just weeks after that was published, Athens County rose to the top of the list. Out of 88 counties,
Right.
my feeling is, this is waste material we're talking about. If you want to inject this, take it someplace else. We are always the recipients in Appalachian counties, in the poorest counties in the state. We don't get the funding. We don't get, we have education cuts. We have no economy here to speak of, except the beauty of our biodiversity, our caves, our tourist attractions, the university, of course, and so many other lovely and wonderful things, our
Yes.
farmers markets, so many just beautiful people, beautiful countryside. I mean, I was looking at the gorgeous hills today, and although we're still experiencing rain, you know, I'd be the last to complain about it because my entire family living out in the West are suffering such misery. I mean, this is looking like paradise where we live, you know, and it would be, except the undercut of that is that in amongst these beautiful hills, this beautiful land, is all of this toxic waste coming in here and being dumped here with no regard to the community, no regard to any of us who are living here. You know, so it's it's very, very frustrating.
Yes, very frustrating, and just the growth. You know, here, in fact, this was one of the first things I noticed. I don't know why there was in 2011 there are 173,000 barrels
Right.
Of waste.
It
2011.
seems to have dropped here in
It seems to
2012.
have dropped in 2012, although perhaps there's a problem with the figures. But then in 2013, here it is at 700,000 barrels in 2013. 2014,
Almost 3 million.
yeah, almost 3 million barrels in 2014, and already in the first part of 2015, it's over 1 million barrels already.
Yes, well, we're up to, I think it's 4.5 million barrels that are, you know, being brought in this into this area. And you know, what I want people to understand is more than half of that is coming from out of state. Pennsylvania,
Yes.
West Virginia, and so forth. I mean, their argument has been, it's kind of a double argument, that their geology isn't adequate for building these injection wells in their own area. We've made a deal with them. We've made a contract a long time ago to take this waste. And I think there's a fallacy in our thinking here. A lot of the people who live in Athens County perhaps think of this as a big economic boon. It isn't that, unfortunately. And we're not talking about fracking here, because there's no fracking being done in Appalachia, I mean, in Athens or
County.
Meigs counties. But we're getting this waste material.
Right.
And the industry would like us to believe it's really rather benign stuff. First of all, they're unwilling to disclose what's in that material.
Right.
We don't even have the right to know if you were to get sick from something. The doctors really are not allowed to really disclose that, and I'm not sure they even know. So that makes it very difficult to provide health care adequately to someone who may be suffering. You know, it would be like you're having some terrible bacteria and nobody knew what it was. Very difficult to treat that, you know, if you don't know what you're treating. But there are not only potentials, the industry wants us to believe that all of the different reports that you've heard across the nation, in Oklahoma, in Pennsylvania, that these movies like Gasland and Gasland 2, that this is all fabricated. And it simply isn't the truth. I mean, there are real people out there, farmers, landowners, real people across this nation who have suffered real losses and illnesses and the loss of water. They're having water trucked in. I mean, I don't know what part of that the gas industry thinks is benign, you know, or they don't wish to accept responsibility for. But we were trying really hard. AFCAN worked very diligently to at least request public meetings. Our county commissioners got in line with that as well. They were very active in trying to contact our state ODNR, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Over 400 letters were sent. I mean, I think that's a remarkable statement, you know, and a request that should have been honored. It was just, we were just insignificant to them. They basically said, there's nothing new here to discuss publicly that hasn't already been addressed. They ignored our requests, they ignored our letters, they ignored the county commissioners. I mean, it's not just a slight and a slap in the face, but I mean, this is what has pushed us towards this effort nationwide. The same thing is happening nationwide.
Right. One of the things that I have among my goodies here, I think. Well, incidentally, I have a couple of pictures.
Okay.
And I know you've been very active. You've been very
Well,
active
I'm trying.
in this
You know, I
cause.
lived in the county for many, many years. I didn't always live in the city here. I mean, I
I
lived in a
see.
farm in the country, and I've been working in healthcare for the last 14 years, as you know. So in my home health and hospice work, I have been in the homes of the poorest of poor we have in the 6 counties around Athens County. So I can tell you from having visited and been in those homes and working with those folks, the kinds of lives they have and the kinds of health issues that they struggle with on a daily basis.
Yes.
Trust me when I tell you, the economics are not there for those people, and the health care is not there for those people.
Yes.
They cannot suffer any more degradation to their air, their water, and in fact, they can't afford it. You know,
Yeah.
they were left destitute by the coal industry, and they're going to be left destitute not only from an economic perspective, but from a healthcare perspective. You know,
There's a real
it's
problem
terrible.
there.
Yeah, it's really terrible.
Well, this is the first article that I cut out, and I suppose this is you. Isn't that you?
Oh, I think it is.
Yes, it says, Milena Miller speaks at the Athens County Courthouse. This was back in April when
Okay,
they started
right.
the petition drive for this home rule Bill of Rights.
Really, that's when we began it, April 23rd. I'd
April
forgotten.
23rd.
Okay.
It's
Well, we got a lot done
yes.
in a very short period of time, really.
Right, as you mentioned, there were at least 35 people who were circulating petitions. I myself was one of the circulators.
Thank you,
I know
you.
you were too.
And you know, those petitions represented people from all 14 townships within Athens County. So it was a very representative group. It wasn't heavy on, in fact, those of us who had petitioned previously in the city of Athens really stayed away from our neighborhoods in the city of Athens. We really reached out to people in the county, and a lot of those 35 people were terrific. They gathered signatures from their neighbors, local farmers, because this affects everybody, and people really do. I mean, you may wish to lease your land because you have the right to do so. I get that. I'm not, you know, I'm not opposed to that. I think the truth needs to be told to you, though, absolutely, about all the ramifications that may potentially happen from your leasing that land, whether or not you're really going to make any money from it, and whether or not there are going to be potential damages to your land, your neighbor's land. Now, this is where it gets tricky, Lois, and the same is true of an injection well. I mean, you could talk to any roofer or plumber or anybody who works with water, and they will be the first to tell you, if you had a water leak, it's not always easy to find out where that water is where it's coming from and where it's going.
Yeah.
It takes some time. And the same is true underground. You know, for the industry to say that they can inject all of these toxins and all this water, which they are having to procure from somewhere, we don't know where. I mean, we have pretty low amounts of water in our streams and rivers around here, if you've noticed, in some of the reservoirs and lakes and what have you. So, and why should we give up that water to the industry? They're not willing to pay for it. They don't have to. And they're also, by the way, not required to pay for any damages they do to our roadways, any of this.
Yeah, and there are a lot of big trucks trucking this material in.
In and out, in and out.
And although they have these other plans, you know, like building this dock down in Meigs County, which they're hoping, you know, the industry is hoping will be able to accept fracking wastewater and either truck it from there, from Meigs, as opposed to starting out in Pennsylvania someplace, you know, or in West Virginia someplace, because as you point out, so much of the wastewater that's fracking waste that's being injected in Athens County is overwhelmingly from out of state.
Absolutely.
It's like 9/10
Right.
In the most recent thing, something like, of this 1,800,000 barrels in this first part of 2015 alone, something like 1,300,000 barrels is
Out of
from
state.
out of state.
I know. I don't think that the taxpayers and the residents understand this. And for the companies to tell us that this material that's being placed into these injection wells is not going to migrate, is not ever going, we won't have to worry about it affecting our aquifers and this and that. I mean, we've already seen and heard from real people in real places where this is occurring about the fact that it has, begun to create problems with their water supplies. So I think that we can't certainly count on that.
Yeah.
And I, having grown up on a farm, I mean, the old adage about worrying about something after the horse is already out of the barn.
Right.
It is really too late when that happens. I can
Yeah.
assure you, once the activity has progressed, these are the kinds of issues that you can't fix. You can't take back.
Well, and a large part of the problem is that it's this local issue,
Right.
the local issue versus the state control, and the fact that the state, especially in the first part of 2015, has gotten court rulings which back up the state supremacy
Right. by
by the Oil and Gas Division of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And they have been given by the state assembly, years ago. They were given this control, and they are exercising it, against us.
as they like to call it, the right to frack, which apparently began with approval by our many-term governor, James Rhodes, way back
Long
then, and
ago,
has
that
just
could
been
be,
supported
yeah.
by every governor since. My experience in southeastern Ohio over many, many years, I first came here in 1963-64 as a young student, but having lived in the countryside, having, raised animals, having taught at Federal Hocking for a year, having taught at Hocking College for 7 years, having taught daycare for 2 years in Chansey, and having provided healthcare services for 14 years. I've traveled these counties a lot, and I've seen a lot of these folks who live out there. I mean, when I first came to home health care back in 2000, we were still getting some of the black lung disease.
Oh, yes,
And there
right.
was a special insurance fund that was set up to take care of black lung patients. You could see them dying over that period of time while I worked there, so that by the time I retired last year, there were fewer and fewer cases of black lung, because most of these people, the old grandfathers, had died.
Yes.
They're
right.
gone, and a lot of their these younger generations have very short-term memories or very little exposure to what that was like. And how these men suffered and what their economy was like and what they were left with. But you only have to drive. My daughter, who lives in Los Angeles, of course, she lives a completely different lifestyle. When I brought her through Perry County and down through Gloucester, I mean, she loves Frog Ranch pickles. The whole family loves Frog Ranch pickles. So I was always trucking them to California for them. But I wanted her to see, that little building is still there, but they're not manufacturing there anymore. But I wanted her to see the processing. And we're driving through these little towns, all of those little coal towns that are virtually boarded up. Most of the businesses are boarded up and have been for years. I mean, you can go to Logan now and see the same thing. In downtown Logan, which was a vibrant community, it wasn't so much of a coal town, perhaps, as some of these other. But I mean, once that economy was devastated, it never felt fully recovered, ever. There were no other jobs to replace it. And this boon about fracking, or particularly about injection wells. That's the real issue here in Athens County, Meigs County. There's a fallacy in everyone's thinking, and this has been fed to us by the oil and gas industry, that there's money to be made by these injection wells. Well, I don't know who's making the money. You know, you're talking about one landowner who's got one piece of property where an injection well is being built. That landowner is not going to see any revenues from that for a long period of time. Hundreds of thousands of barrels have to be injected before they even get to see the first check. And then it's going to be a very minuscule amount of money in comparison to some big drilling operation or something else, that could go on there, or some other activity. So it's that guy who's owning that injection well, really, who's been given complete freedom to do whatever he wants, he or she, to that property and bring in as many millions of barrels as is possible of this really toxic waste material.
Well, the interesting thing, too, Milena, is that we have currently at least a total of 8 injection wells in Athens County.
Right, that's correct.
Now, 3 of those, including the 2 largest ones, over in Troy Township, I believe it is.
And Lodi, I think.
Troy and Lodi Township, are owned by a K&H company, which is a West Virginia firm.
Right.
And they're the ones that are taking the largest amounts of injection material now. This new one especially that they're just currently drilling will mean, as we pointed out earlier, so many, many more barrels and barrels, thousands of barrels, millions of barrels of waste coming in through K&H. Now, obviously, there are probably 8 landowners in Athens County who have benefited from selling the right to drill an injection well on their property. But for instance, like I say, it's actually K&H is the one that's in charge now. That landowner is just sitting there, and I don't know whether he's enjoying the fact or whether he's moved to Florida
or whether they've gotten paid very much at all. Well, and so it hasn't stimulated the economy much either, really, for us on a local level.
Yeah.
Because you don't have, K&H is not employing some vast amount of people to bring in these barrels and inject them. I doubt the truckers are from here. I doubt any of the workers have been hired on a local basis. What, out of Coolville, Torch? It's not happening, Lois. It simply isn't happening. So we can't benefit from that. It's not like there's a pool of workers who are suddenly being employed, who have been on welfare or something, or who have not, or have been unemployed.
Yeah.
So what are the real benefits of this happening? In fact, the trucking that's happening to the injection well out towards Albany and off 143, 144, I can't remember the route number. The road has been so damaged already, so badly damaged, that they've been approached by our county commissioners, and they're in negotiating and talking about this now. But the owner, of the injection well has basically said, I'm not going to pay the $100,000 it's going to cost to repair that road. Now, if you look at our county engineer's most recent report from Athens County by Jeff Maiden about the shortage of funds to repair our roads. And then you think about, well, why should we taxpayers, whether you're in favor of injection wells or not, I mean, I can't imagine anybody would be. I don't know why you would be in favor. If you thought you wanted to hang on, I can understand people who are into hanging on to their gun rights or their right to hunt deer or their right to this or their right to protect or do whatever they want on their piece of property. I understand that. I've been a property owner. I get that. But you must also respect the rights of those people whose properties are adjacent to yours.
Right, the neighbors.
Exactly. And you would feel absolutely put upon if your neighbor wanted to dump toxic materials on his property that might migrate onto yours, and you didn't wish that to happen. If the things were reversed, I can tell you these other guys and gals would be up in arms. They'd be screaming bloody murder, saying, not on my land, you know. But they don't seem to follow through our thinking on this about the fact that, you know, you may be unhappy, or maybe you're happy with everything that is dictated to you from the state. The point is, it's a form of government. It's allowed our governors for many, many years to make decisions like this, to give an entire industry the right to frack, as they like to call it. Well, I mean, the voters didn't get to vote upon that. We voted to put somebody in office, true, enough. But that's why the Ohio Constitution does allow and provide for a certain amount of activity and ability to restore a government, to challenge a government, what have you, from a home rule perspective. Otherwise, local governments would be absolutely useless. We may as well be living in a dictatorship with our governor, Kasich, and the rest of them who sit in the state dictating every single move we make. And that just can't be. I mean, it isn't. No. You know, they don't have a clear knowledge of what is even happening down in southeastern Ohio. I can tell you this because I'm a grants writer and I wrote grants for years. You can't get a piece of money from any foundation in the state, from any, you know, to come into this area. I mean, and the same is true of any kind of economic expansion. We get the cuts. We don't get the benefits, you know. I mean, Jack Freck fought this for years, you know.
Yes, he did.
So, with Jobs and Family Services and benefits.
Well, you know, Milena, one of the things that I find really interesting is, you know, we're talking about the right to petition.
Exactly.
That is definitely in our federal Bill of Rights. And there was a president of the United States a long time ago, John Quincy Adams,
right,
who was a one-term president in the 1820s. But after he was president of the United States, and of course his father was actually president too before him, he became a member of the House of Representatives for a number of years. I think he's the only president who has also served as a member of the Congress.
Okay.
And he was very big on petitions. One of his, the thing that he was mostly gathering petition signatures for was actually on the question of slavery. He was an abolitionist, and he encouraged people, you know. Thousands of people in the North, especially, not only in Massachusetts, which was his home state, but across the North, signed petitions against slavery and against the Fugitive Slave Act later. Actually, he died about the time the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. But he personally saw to it that thousands of signatures, because of the right of petition, went to the federal government in the 1830s and 40s due to the efforts in part of former President John Quincy Adams. So the right of petition is a very basic right.
And it is the real crux of what this is all about in terms of this home rule movement. And what is guaranteed to us by the Ohio Constitution is our right to petition too. And you know, to go back from way to the beginning of our conversation, when we presented these almost 2,200 signatures of people who legitimately expressed their views through a petition process to help get this charter form of government in Athens County. And it was pretty clearly spelled out. I mean, people were allowed to read and encouraged to read the petition before they signed it. It explained what a charter government could do for us. giving us the right to petition, giving us the right on a county-wide basis to express the needs of various tiny little villages and communities and, municipality. Villages like Coolville or the Plains or Chansey, whatever, who don't normally have any kind of a form of government in which to speak for themselves or, to express their wishes about something that's happening personally to them. So they have to ride along with the state on all issues. So it's much larger than just the injection well piece.
Yes.
But we received word, of course, in the last couple of days that although Keller Blackburn, the assistant Athens county prosecuting attorney, suggested his formal opinion to the, he sent this whole issue to the Attorney General's office, to Attorney General Mike DeWine for his view on it, or his request for a demand on that, about whether or not this was a legal kind of thing, or whether we were in order to put this on the fall ballot. Though we have 3 other counties who are simultaneously going along with this same action. So it seems to me we're still waiting for Mike DeWine's office to respond. Of course, in the period of time in which he's got to respond, 2 of the counties, Medina and Fulton, have already, it's already been accepted by their boards of elections.
Well, that's an interesting thing, Milena. Our Board of Elections has denied the
Denied
charter.
it.
Yeah.
Even though Keller Blackburn in this letter said, "It is my opinion that while the proposed charter does not structurally change the form of government in Athens County, as was done with charter governments in Cuyahoga and Summit County, the board," he's requesting this of our board in Athens County, "should approve the proposed charter to the ballot unless an opinion from the Attorney General confirms the proposal is not a charter." They did not, these 4 members of the Board of Elections simply did not wait for that to happen. They made this decision Monday afternoon, even though they were being suggested to them by Keller Blackburn that they honor the requests and the of almost 2,200 people to put this on the ballot and give the voters a choice. Now the dilemma will come.
Well, the interesting thing is that the Board of Elections accepted the signatures, as
Yes.
being valid, that there
Yes.
were more than the 1,500
Right.
required or
Right.
whatever, that sort of thing. But simultaneously, they voted not to accept the charter proposal per se for the ballot in November. And that's very interesting.
And we have to ask ourselves why.
Well, I think they must have gotten word somehow from Columbus that, you just can't do this sort of thing. And
Oh, good shot, Lois.
I don't know.
Well, that was suggested by a couple of our members of our committee.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that personally, I don't know, personally what they might have thought that of the whole idea of trying to regulate fracking waste in Athens County by turning to a charter form of government. But they might individually have decided that that would be a good idea, but if they get word from Columbus, hey, you can't do this sort of thing, this is not a proper charter kind of.
well, we don't know, of course, what influenced their vote.
Right.
I presume, it is their duty, and they are paid to do this. These are not unpaid positions on the Board of Elections. They are paid, and they should be, to be the Board of Elections members. But it is also their duty. So they would have had to have read in great detail our charter, our proposed charter.
Right.
They gave no reason why or specified any part of that charter they didn't agree with, except to say they didn't feel it met the charter form of government. Now, I can assure you, other than that document, I would venture to say of the 4 of those members, they didn't do a lot of research on what a charter government is before they made that vote.
That could be.
But I'm not
We don't
sure.
know.
I
No.
could bet money on it. But in the bigger point is that right then and there, now our committee chair, Dick McGinn, and the reporter from the Athens News, David DeWitt, were both in attendance at this meeting. So all of this procedure took place with other people there.
Yeah.
And so Mr. Blackburn offered his opinion, and they didn't take it. They didn't wait for DeWine's office to respond from the Attorney General's office to make a response about whether this was appropriate or not for the fall ballot. So these 4 individuals took it upon themselves to vote unanimously against placing this on the ballot. This has only happened in Athens County. It may be this morning that Meigs has, I wasn't able to check before I came here, maybe that Meigs has either approved or not for it to be on the ballot. But Medina and Fulton have. I think now it places our Attorney General in a position of, because it's really, the petitions and the ballot issues are virtually the same in all 4 counties. So it will be interesting to see what DeWine's office has to say. However, our attorneys from the civil defense attorneys, legal defense attorneys that we have recommended last evening that we will issue a protest. We have so many days, weeks to issue that protest, and we fully intend to do that.
Right. Well, and it may be that the Board of Elections itself was under some sort of time pressure. They have to accept or reject by, X date, July 4th or whatever.
But they knew, both in person and according to this letter, that Blackburn had requested a formal opinion from the Attorney General's office, which would certainly have been given in time, in a timely fashion, for this issue to either still appear on the ballot or not. Why they chose to ignore this request by the prosecuting attorney and to wait for that opinion, this is what is very peculiar and comes into question. And why they chose to do that as opposed to these other boards of elections in these other counties.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting because, of course, one other problem is that when we had Democracy Day, I'm not sure, were you able to attend?
Yes. No. I went to the Democracy School. I wasn't able to attend Democracy Day.
The Democracy Day event. Tom Hudson spoke, who is, not only a journalist, a former head of the School of Journalism at Ohio University.
An attorney and an ex-judge.
Right, an ex-judge and so on. And so he spoke to the legal issues and the fact that there had been these at least three cases which had already occurred by June 13th, which was, all of a sudden in early 2015 we had 3 cases which came before, not here in Athens County, but other places in Ohio. And in each case, the state supremacy was upheld, basically. But, and just Monday, I think it was, there was a article in the paper about another case, which again has gone against those who are speaking in favor of local home rule.
Is that the Madian case?
Yeah, the Madian case, which was the Mothers Against Drilling in northern Ohio someplace. And once again, the General Assembly has given the permission to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Oil and Gas, to accept permits or, allow permits.
Right.
And that goes against anything that the local people might want.
Well, it doesn't give us, it's very curious. Dick and I were speaking about this last night. When you look across the state, and this is true, what you've said, yes, we've had the supremacy decision that has been handed down by the Supreme Court in Ohio against at least 3 that I know of these movements, if you will, all surrounding the oil and gas industry. I mean, I'm guessing if this was another issue where another industry or corporation doesn't have that right to do whatever they want, it'd be interesting to see how that could be challenged. But this is, after all, oil and gas. So while that has happened, Dick and I were speaking last night, and it's interesting that throughout many other counties, Richland County, in fact, where I'm from, in Mansfield, all of these other issues that were proposed and petitioned did eventually occur and were placed upon their ballots. Athens County is the only example, the only county in the 88 where something has been proposed that has not been allowed by our Board of Elections. It's very curious. It's very curious.
Yeah. Well,
either they're just geniuses that have got some kind of information we aren't aware of, or they haven't studied the issue very well at all.
Well, and of course, this is early days. This Board of Elections decision was just 2 days ago, on Monday, the 6th of July. And this article about the Mothers Against Drilling was from last week. That's now the fourth lawsuit which has gone against the idea of local control against the state. You begin to think, well, maybe we're attacking the wrong thing here. Maybe what we really need to be talking about is the state government. Why does the state government have this kind of authority? On the question of oil and gas fracking, well, we know that they have it because they've been granted it by the General Assembly. And they sort of have this thing, there's nothing we can do. The General Assembly has made this decision.
They're above their own law. That is,
if there's a permit application, we just have to accept it.
Right.
I get that impression that this is the sort of response they have. They certainly have not moved to have local input. When we've tried to have local input in the past, they've said, oh, we've already addressed that. And just say, we don't need to hear from any local people how they feel about this. The only thing that counts is that we have a permit application, and we're going to get money for every barrel of, or gallon, whatever it is, however they add it up. It's very little. It is absolutely the least in the whole U.S. We have the lowest amount given for permitting.
Right. Drilling or any activities.
The drilling, but after the drilling, when they have the gallons
the revenues,
and the barrels to dispose of, that is when the state gets a certain amount of money. And they get more money for out-of-state waste. They get 20 cents as opposed to 5 cents for Ohio fracked
oil
or gas waste water. So, hey, they're making big bucks out of Athens County by us accepting 9/10 of the injection water from out of state. They're making big bucks at the state level for Ohio Department of Natural Resources, oil and gas, except that I read somewhere this interesting thing that after they reach a certain amount, they no longer have to pay at all.
I think that's true. And the other part of the issue, I don't know if Ohioans understand this or not, most of this oil and gas that's being fracked in Ohio is not helping Ohio economy ultimately in the end result either. We're not seeing, not only are we not seeing enough of the revenues, we're not getting to use those fracked oil and gas loads that are coming out, being extracted. That's mostly being shipped off to China and other places. It's not being used here.
It's international commerce.
That's right.
Centering international commerce.
So this is really the crux of it. This is really, it's that it's interesting, and there's always been a battle between federal rights and states' rights.
Yes, right.
I always like to say that it's curious that the things that nobody wants to touch, that the states have power over, are always issues at the beginning of life or at the end of life. And anything in between, let's just give it to the feds, And the people who complain sometimes the loudest about our government, whether it be the federal government, and there is a lot of bureaucracy to complain about. But, if you're taking any benefits, federal benefits, and you're still complaining about them, and you're not willing to do anything. This process of home rule gives us an opportunity, which we are guaranteed by the Ohio Constitution and the federal Constitution, to express what we want, what kind of things we want to see in our communities and in our local government. Don't we have the right to say that? I mean, don't we have the right to say what gets done with our land? Don't we have the right to say how we want life to be enjoyed here? We should have the right to clean air and clean water. We shouldn't have to accept contaminated fracking materials from outside the borders of the state of Ohio for any reason, whether it be international commerce or all this money that supposedly is going into the coffers. I go back to this point about locally what's happening to just this one road out by Albany, and that the injection well owner has absolutely refused. Now, this is a thing that's ongoing right now, and they're going to have to come to terms with this. I am going to be, personally, as one taxpayer, absolutely outraged, and I may just refuse to pay my taxes because I'm not willing to go out there and fix that road that man has absolutely torn up and created this problem. And why should the people who live along that road, and why should the rest of us in Athens County have to pay for that? It's ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, so
well,
these are the kinds of issues that we're trying to fight for.
Yes, and it's this is only the beginning. It's not the end of things. It's the beginning of what rights do people have locally? What rights do states have over the local people? And the federal, and the whole thing comes in interstate commerce. That's why we're getting all this stuff from Pennsylvania and West Virginia. International commerce, as you pointed out, since much of the fracking that's currently being done in the northeast part of Ohio is going
being
abroad,
shipped out,
and so on. It's just very interesting.
It's perplexing, I mean, AFCAN, which is the Athens Fracking Network that's been working on this issue for a long time, headed by Heather Cantino and a band of men and women who have worked really, really diligently at this. And, they're looking now to try and have a moratorium on any more wells being drilled. This is another approach that's being taken. I mean, if you look at the state of New York, that moratorium has worked quite well, and I'm betting that the tourism industry, the wineries in New York, I can imagine that Governor Cuomo has had a lot of pressure from a lot of different areas where people did not want fracking in that state.
Right. Well, we've had a very lively session, Milena, and we're right down to the close here. So I do want to say thank you to Milena Miller.
Thank you for having me,
who is very active with the Bill of Rights Committee locally. And this is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday.